Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormley, joined as I am every Sunday night by Andrew Erickson and Dr. Deepak Chona. Erickson, I ask you every week, so I'll ask you once again, how did today's fantasy matchups treat you?
I loved it. It was great matchups up across the board. A lot of big games that went down to the wire. A lot of fantasy points scored. Just looking at this slate, it looked like there was going to be a lot of points scored this week. And basically, if you didn't get hurt, you probably had a pretty good fantasy week from the guys that you put out there.
We were really excited about a lot of these matchups coming into the week. Deepak, how did the week treat you?
So far, so good. But yeah, lots of injuries. So I know we have a ton.
Yeah, we've had a couple weeks recently where it's, only two or three. You kind of almost have to make some up, or not really make them up, but like kind of find some others here and there, smaller injuries to talk about. That's not the case this week. We have plenty of big name guys who went down. It was very unfortunate. The only bad part about the week. Before we jump into that, just want to make a note for those watching this show live on YouTube. Thank you. We will be here each and every Sunday night around 7:45 Eastern all season long. If you're watching us here on youtube.com/fantasypros, please give us a like and be sure to subscribe to help us out if you enjoy our content. Click the bell to get notified of all of our latest podcasts, short videos, and live streams. And for the folks listening on the podcast, don't forget that we are live each and every Sunday night, so you can watch us along with every other Fantasy Pros podcast over on our YouTube channel. Again, that's youtube.com/fantasypros. We've got a giveaway from last week that I get to announce the winner of. The winner of the autographed Justin Jefferson Minnesota Vikings jersey, courtesy of pristineauction.com, is Anthony DeVito. Congratulations. Please get in touch with our customer support agents at mailbag@fantasypros.com with your mailing address and proof of your subscription to the Fantasy Pros channel. We will get that jersey shipped out to you. Again, the winner is Anthony DeVito. Congratulations. Now that we've given that one away, let's do another one. If you want a chance to win a signed Jerry Jeudy NFL football, courtesy again of our friends at Pristine Auction, all you need to do is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now, comment below on this video, and that's it. Make sure to turn on notifications to know when new videos drop and find out if you've won. As you mentioned, Deepak, tons of injuries to get to, so we will jump right in. Let's start with the guy that I'm most depressed about. Lamar Jackson had a knee injury early in the second quarter in their game against the Broncos. Didn't actually look terrible live in watching the game. They actually went to a commercial break. When they came back, they had announced that he was leaving the game. Tyler Huntley was in. He eventually was ruled questionable and then ruled out for the game, never came back with that knee injury. What can you tell us based on the video?
Yeah, the video suggests a PCL injury, but the fact that they're saying it's not season ending already suggests that he may have some bone bruising and a sprain, but probably not a tear. So that's overall good news. Most common would be about 2 to 4 weeks. Based on their early comments, we lean closer towards that 2 side of the range.
Yeah, definitely great to hear John Harbaugh say after the game, definitively not season ending, but we'll know more about that timetable later in the week. So definitely be sure to be paying attention to all the Fantasy Pros news and shows throughout the week so you can catch up on what's going on there. Erickson, just if Tyler Huntley were to start a couple of games, we saw in the preseason and last year, he loves throwing to Mark Andrews. You see that often with backup quarterbacks. They love going to the tight end. Would you expect that to continue in any games that he starts?
Yeah, I think it's kind of more of the same. I don't think you change a lot of your expectations with the way that the Ravens deploy their offense with Tyler Huntley under center. If anything, it makes Tyler Huntley an interesting streaming guy. Pick up if you lost Lamar Jackson, someone that you can play because he has that mobility that adds a lot of fantasy value. We saw him down the stretch last year be very productive for not only Mark Andrews, but for fantasy managers that were starting him. So definitely someone to consider on waivers this week.
Some breaking news for the next quarterback we're talking about, Jimmy G. He went down with, looked like a foot injury, maybe ankle is what it looked like live. They announced just a few minutes ago as we were about to start recording, his left foot is broken and he is out for the season. So now that we have that information, Deepak, what's your sort of projection on, obviously out for the season, but is this something you come back from fully if you're a quarterback? How does that sort of affect him long term?
Yeah, for a pocket quarterback, yes, you would expect a full recovery. You do see some players, skill position players, start slow like Travis Etienne did this past year, coming off of these types of injuries. But quarterback, especially his style, I would expect a full recovery.
Just, terrible luck for the Niners. Obviously, Trey Lance at the start of the year, now Jimmy G. Brock Purdy didn't play terrible today, but he's clearly not the guy you want there. Erickson, obviously so many fantasy managers are heavily invested in this offense at the skill position players. Just how much are you dropping these guys in your rankings knowing that it's now Purdy rest of season?
I mean, I think you kind of have to look at guys in different tiers. So, like Debo, was kind of like that wide receiver 1 tier. I think he's really now a wide receiver 2. Ayuk, kind of wide receiver 3 tier. Like, we used to just be starting them, basically hoping that one of them hits every single week because we know that one of them hits. But now it may not be that any of them hit every single week anymore. Like, I don't think that will necessarily be the case. Now, McCaffrey obviously got it done today, and I think maybe he's probably the safest guy moving forward. But you're going to feel lucky if it's one of Debo, Ayuk, or Kittle that does decent in 1 week. So most weeks, I think you're going to be trying to find different options than those 3 guys.
Very quickly, just given Kyle Shanahan's track record as an offensive guy and given all the skill position talent, do you have any interest in Brock Purdy himself?
I think in some deep performance, I think it's definitely worth it because we've seen quarterbacks put in places where there are a lot of weapons around them and they produce, whether their quarterback is good or not. I mean, it's really about, can you be accurate? Can you deliver the ball? Like we've seen it with Mike White these last 2 weeks. Like he's thrown for a ton of yards and like put up some production because he has good weapons. So again, I had to look exactly at the matchups. I know they have a pretty favorable schedule the rest of season. So especially in the Superflex formats where Brock Purdy definitely is not rostered anywhere. You got to scoop him up.
Another quarterback with an injury came very late in his game. Tua Tagovailoa, an ankle injury. They announced him questionable to return. I don't think the Dolphins even got the ball back after that point, unless I missed something. So Deepak, what did you see here on the video? And is this a long-term issue or just sort of unable to finish out this one, but should be back next week?
Yeah, like you said, you can't really tell much because by him not coming back because it was already kind of game in hand. But a low ankle here would be most commonly played through. High ankle, usually 2 to 3 weeks for quarterbacks. So we'll know a lot more by the Thursday, Friday practice reports for Tua.
And we've seen this offense without Tua before, Erickson. So I'll just move on to our next guy, Trevor Lawrence, another quarterback. So many of these guys this week. He did return to his game. The injury, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because it looked so ugly live. I think a lot of people on Twitter, at least, were pretty much assuming the worst when we saw, that foot was planted and then the twist, just a lot of force, a lot of stuff you don't want to see on a football field. And also, he's been really coming on lately, and he didn't have quite the great game today, but he's been so good the last few weeks. So it was, really discouraging to see, but then really encouraging to see him come back. Deepak, what do you make of this situation?
Yeah, super encouraging that he came right back. He was also scrambling afterwards, so you got to think he's got some mild sprain for sure, but at the most, he's going to have some soreness. I don't expect much performance impact by next week.
So if you had to put a number on it, like 90% level, something like that?
Yeah, I would anticipate at least 90%. Plus because he can play from the pocket, so I'm not looking at too bad of a hit.
Let's move on from the quarterbacks here. Wide receiver Courtland Sutton had a hamstring injury in his game against the Ravens, put up another dud, which I'm sure Erickson is happy to talk about. But Deepak, did you see anything on the video with this one?
Well, the typical hamstring is a 2 to 3 week injury, average is 3. So with the way his sounded, at least moderate severity, I think that's probably around what you're looking at. MRI will tell the whole story tomorrow.
Erickson, does Jeudy jump up in your rankings when Sutton's out?
Yep. Jeudy and Greg Dulcich both, their value definitely spikes without Sutton.
Another wide receiver that I don't know that we have a ton of information on, but just to quickly mention before we move off the position, Jaylen Waddle, there was questionable to return with a leg injury. He might have actually come back into the game. I'm not entirely sure. Deepak, did you see anything here?
Not really. Couldn't find the injury video, and there's not much reported on it yet, so we'll keep an eye out for those headlines.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said at the beginning of the show, please be sure everybody to be following our shows all week long to catch up on all of the latest news and notes. And then a running back, Kenneth Walker, who's been, one of the godsends for a lot of fantasy managers this season, had an ankle injury, initially was questionable to return, and then became, ruled out for the game. So Deepak, what did you see here?
Yeah, the video, the sort of timeline to rule him out, plus the way his ankle is taped up, all suggest a low ankle sprain. So most commonly, these would cost 0 or 1 game for a running back. When they come back, they do come back at close to full performance levels, but they also have this elevated re-injury risk to watch out for.
And Erickson, we were talking earlier this afternoon that Walker isn't the only guy who's kind of banged up in this backfield. What are you doing with it from a fantasy perspective right now?
Well, Travis Homer missed this game. He was already hurt, and DJ Dallas got banged up a little bit, but then he ended up coming back into the game, and then they were mixing in Tony Jones Jr. So they had a committee. They used both DJ Dallas and Tony Jones, and that's what I would suspect that they do the same thing if Kenneth Walker misses next week or any time in the future. I think they'll just do a running back by committee, and I think that you're really only going to either of those guys, probably Dallas, just if you're desperate.
Lastly, Hayden Hurst, tight end for the Bengals, calf injury. Again, did not return to his game. Deepak, did you see anything here?
Yeah, the typical calf strain for a skill position player would be 2 to 4 weeks, but they examined him for a while before ruling him out. So it sort of leans you towards the lower end of that spectrum.
Erickson, outside of not being able to play Hurst himself, if he's out, do you think that really impacts this offense all that much?
I think it makes Tyler Boyd maybe someone you can be more hopeful about. I know that Boyd has really been tough to start over the last couple of weeks, and he's really matchup dependent. Even this week, he didn't really do a lot in the box score. But, if you just look at him versus Hayden Hurst, when Hayden Hurst has had bad games, like it's been better games for Tyler Boyd. And even though Tyler Boyd didn't blow up this week, he still had a better game relative to what he has been doing when Hurst has been 100% healthy. So it's really only Boyd, but obviously it's still the Higgins and Jamar Chase show in Cincinnati.
Just two other names to quickly mention. Isaiah Likely had a shoulder injury, but he came back in the game and actually, had another catch and made a nice play. So he appears to be all right. Aaron Jones had a shin injury, left the game at one point, but he did return as well. Thank you so much for joining us as you do every Sunday night, Deepak. We will take a quick commercial break, everybody, and then be right back for the rest of the slate.
Later, guys.
Want to dominate your fantasy football leagues? Well, then you need My Playbook, available only from FantasyPros. Struggling with the waiver wire? My Playbook lets you see who the top available players are week to week. Can't decide who to start? Compare your players side by side with detailed breakdowns and projections for each week of your fantasy season. And it's all included with your premium subscription to FantasyPros. So sign up today at FantasyPros.com or download our free My Playbook app to your Apple or Android device. Erickson, we have a lot of games here because we only had 2 bye-week teams, so we will jump right into our headlines. Start with quarterback.
Hurts so good. Jalen Hurts just going absolutely nuclear against the Tennessee Titans. He had 3 passing touchdowns, 380 yards. He had another rushing touchdown. A.J. Brown brought him along the way. DeVonta Smith. Look, this was bound to happen eventually. A massive game for Hurts against a pass funnel defense. So I was really high on A.J. Brown this week, and kind of like that means that I have to be high on Jalen Hurts as well. And I didn't play nearly enough Jalen Hurts in DFS, which I just don't understand because I played A.J. Brown basically everywhere, and that worked out, but didn't play enough Jalen Hurts, and that was a mistake on my part. But, I mean, he just has everything you want for a fantasy quarterback.
He obviously elevated into, that elite tier of the position for this year, at least from a fantasy perspective, pretty early on, like back in September. I think most of us had kind of already moved him up quite a bit. Should he just be QB1 rest of the season in fantasy?
I think it's still like a toss-up between him and Josh Allen. It's, depending on the matchup, it can change a little bit. But, I mean, from a rushing perspective, I think that he probably has the most. I mean, Justin Fields probably actually offers the most rushing, but Hurts has more touchdown equity because he just plays in a better offense overall. And, they're more than happy to give it to Hurts at the goal line and not give it to Miles Sanders, who did score today. So I was low on Miles Sanders, but he snuck in that touchdown. So you guys got all lucky that decided to keep him in your lineup.
All right, let's move to running back. I assume you won't be talking about Miles Sanders here.
No, I will not be talking about Miles Sanders. I'm going to talk about CMC. It's the CMC we were promised. We finally saw him get back to, pseudo bell cow usage. And now it wasn't he's going to see every single down, every single snap, but it was much better in the first time when we saw him land with the 49ers. He had 17 carries, 66 yards, 8 catches on 10 targets, 25% target share. So I think that the team is going to continue to lean on Christian McCaffrey. They traded a boatload of picks for him, and now they just lost their starting quarterback. So it's like, hey, we like to have McCaffrey for the long term, but we also want to win the Super Bowl. We have a Super Bowl winning defense, and we're not going to let the Jimmy Garoppolo injury stop us from trying to make a run at it. And I think that means we're going to get more CMC. Now, Jordan Mason was the RB2 here. I know we had a lot of question marks about, is it going to be him? Is it going to be Tyrion Davis-Price? It was Jordan Mason. He had 8 carries for 51 yards, but he was used sparingly throughout. I think it's really a CMC and the 10 targets. Like, that is massive, and I don't think that's going to go away as long as Brock Purdy is the quarterback.
So overall, you think the likely increased usage going forward outweighs the likely less efficient offense overall?
I think so, yeah. But we have to remember, too, looking back at Nick Mullins, like just a regular guy, he's like top 5 in yards per attempt in NFL history. Why? Because he played in the 49ers offense. So maybe I wasn't high enough when we talked about Brock Purdy before. And I'll be totally honest, I don't know that much about him. I'd have to go look back at my scouting of him and the rookie profile. But he's in this offense that is going to help boost the efficiency. So if he can be a Mike White type of quarterback and be accurate, which he showed that he could do today, then I think that McCaffrey at least will be fine.
Talk to me about the sun god for your wide receiver headline.
I know last week we talked about Chris Godwin. Now we're talking about another god. In the sun god we trust with Amon-Ra St. Brown. This guy just continues to do it all every single week. 11 catches, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns, 12 targets, 31% target share. It doesn't matter like who they're playing. It doesn't matter like he's on the sideline, like he just got the wind knocked out of him, and he's still like back out there making plays. He just has that mindset of just like pain is weakness leaving the body. Obviously, he learned it from his dad, who used to be Mr. Olympia. So I'm really not surprised as a gym goer myself. I like to think that I am tough, not nearly as tough as Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'm just not even surprised anymore about that. He just puts up these numbers every single week.
I was going to say, that's about to be quite a comparison, comparing your toughness to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He also had a rushing attempt, only went for 2 yards, but just to sort of point out that they do use him in a multitude of ways. He had 12 targets in this one. Nobody else on the team had more than 6. So just an absolute alpha. And then at tight end, there really wasn't anything, going on. There was 5 players that reached double figures in half PPR scoring. None of them got over 12.2 points. So, and that was Noah Fant. So I know you didn't pick Fant. Who did you pick from this kind of mad group of tight ends this week?
Well, I did it because this was the best player in his game from the way that I viewed just the box scores. Doing the Dulcich, the Greg Dulcich here. I mean, he was the most productive player in Ravens Broncos, and I cannot remember a tight end not named Travis Kelce, George Kittle, or Rob Gronkowski that can really take the cake as, this was the best player playing in this game. But Dulcich, 6 for 85, team high 8 targets, which is a 38% target share. And this isn't going to go away. Like we saw Dulcich obviously come out of the gates red hot. His first couple games were like, this guy's breaking out. And then he had a lull in production. We're like, okay, like, are we starting Greg Dulcich? He's starting to get dropped. And then he has this other big game. And I don't think it is totally Courtland Sutton getting hurt in this game. That matters because if he's going to be missing time, I think we're going to see more consistent production from a Greg Dulcich type player. Look, this Broncos offense is obviously not super exciting, but at the tight end position, we talked about it with like Cole Kmet during some of the start sit shows. If you have the chance to lead your team in targets at tight end, you have to be started. And that could be the case here with Greg Dulcich moving forward.
Well, and not just lead the team in targets, but just like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he doubled up anybody else in targets. He had 8. Next highest was 4. So, I mean, he was the apple of Russ Wilson's eye. Again, how valuable is that right now? You never know. But at a wasteland like tight end, you'll certainly take it. Let's jump into the rest of the early afternoon slate. First game, we'll talk about Steelers 19, Falcons 16. Drake London, 6 catches, 95 yards, team high 12 targets, which was a 50% target share. Obviously, it wasn't a blow up in terms of he didn't get in the end zone and he didn't go over 100 yards, but this is certainly moving in the right direction from what we've been hoping to see the Falcons do with Drake London all season long.
Yeah, London has had games like this before where he's just commanded an enormous target share, and it's easier to do when you don't throw the ball a lot in the offense, but it's just something to remember for next year. Like the fact that Drake London is doing this, it shows that he is talented. He is a top 10 talent, and all it takes is new quarterback, an offense that wants to throw the ball more, and Drake London is going to see his fantasy value like skyrocket. So I know that he's been frustrating to own this year, but I think in next year with a quarterback change, I think you're going to look forward to having Drake London on your fantasy team. So it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind.
With the rest of the Falcons, do you take anything away from Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier? Once again, having really similar stat lines on the ground, at least. Patterson, 11 rushes, 60 yards. Algier, 10 rushes for 52 yards.
Not too surprised. It's kind of how it's been since Patterson got back. The worst thing, though, is that 0 targets for Patterson. Like, that was the biggest red flag for me because I know last week we talked about, oh, my God, like, he had more targets. Like, it's great. And it's like, no, it was a fake. It was a mirage. And it's frustrating because they're not using him more as a wide receiver like I thought they might do. They didn't do that. So you can't rely on Patterson as a receiver. He's splitting work as a running back. You play him in good matchups. You don't play him in bad matchups.
I'm going to read through some of the stat lines for the Steelers. I don't think there's really much to take away here, but you can feel free to disagree with me. Najee Harris, 17 carries, 86 yards in the ground, 1 target, 1 catch for 6 yards. Pat Freiermuth, 3 catches, 76 yards on 5 targets. Deontay Johnson, 5 for 60 on a team high 11 targets. I guess George Pickens just having 1 catch for 2 yards on 2 targets is probably the big takeaway out of that group, just him not getting the workload that he had been starting to get lately.
Yeah, I mean, they got to stop throwing the ball to Deontay so much. Like every time we do this, he gets double-digit targets, and he gets 60 yards, and he doesn't score. So I think that Pickens is probably going to get pretty vocal. I saw him frustrated on the sideline about how he'd only had 1 catch. Now, I don't know, because I was watching this game directly, I don't know where they had put AJ Terrell. I don't know if AJ Terrell was shadowing George Pickens. I know AJ Terrell covered a pass in the end zone that went to Dante, but yeah, like there's no way I'm going to see Pickens have this limited amount of workload going into next week. I think that they're going to try to get him the ball. But yeah, Pickens it's just so close, man. It's still close for him, but super frustrating in this offense.
The Falcons are one of 6 teams on bye next week, which is absolutely brutal for the last week of the fantasy regular season in a lot of leagues. So that's really tough, and definitely be aware of that as you're getting ready to set your lineups in week 14. Falcons are on bye. The Steelers are going to host the Ravens, so a very fun rivalry there. Let's get that Ravens game out of the way because there's really not much to talk about. Very ugly game. If you like defense, this was the game for you. Latavius Murray, 17 carries, 47 yards rushing. All other running backs on the team combined for just 8 carries. So he was the clear workhorse. He had 4 catches on 4 targets but just 14 yards on that. Greg Dulcich, like you already talked about, team high 8 targets, 85 yards. And Jerry Jeudy, even with Courtland Sutton not in the game, didn't do great. 4 catches on 4 targets, just 65 yards. And on the Ravens side, Mark Andrews, 4 catches on 7 targets, 53 yards. Demarcus Robinson, 7 for 41 on 8 targets. Gus Edwards, 4 carries for 12 yards. Kenyon Drake, 7 for 29. I mean, there really was not anything happening in this game. Again, if you're an IDP player, you probably love this game, but otherwise, you certainly did not enjoy it, and it was not on red zone very much until the end. What do you make of the Ravens offense with Tyler Huntley at QB? We talked about it a little in the injury segment, but is there anything that you would sort of take away from like the secondary pieces like Deshaun Jackson or DeMarcus Robinson if you're in a deep league where you're not just starting the obvious like Mark Andrews? Is there any juice there?
I mean, I think it's still DeMarcus Robinson. I mean, he's the only one that's shown any type of consistency. I know like Duvernay continues to like run more routes than him and plays more snaps, but it doesn't really matter because DeMarcus Robinson's the only guy that's getting targets. And even in this game, like all his targets came from Tyler Huntley. So like you saw a connection between those two guys in the NFL field of play. It was a tough matchup against the Broncos. DeMarcus Robinson also got involved, but I mean, he's a wide receiver 4 at best, not someone you really want to rely on. But with bye weeks next week, you may have to turn to DeMarcus Robinson, especially in a good matchup because it's the Steelers and their secondary is atrocious. So D-Rob, I think, is kind of the guy I would gravitate towards here. And just weird to see them go away from Gus Edwards after they leaned on him so much last week. And there's like now like he was ineffective, and then they put in Kenyon Drake, who was, I guess, a little bit better. But yeah, just tough to trust the backfield.
The Ravens, like you said, they visit the Steelers next week. Broncos are going to host the Chiefs. 10-9 was the final in that game with the Ravens winning.
Woof.
Yeah, woof. I did predict before that game on the Friday show. I said there's no way the Broncos reach double digits, and they didn't. But the Ravens still only won by a single point. Before we move on with the show, I just want to let everybody know if you're not currently a premium subscriber, we have an amazing deal going on that gets you 6 free months of access to all of our premium features and content. This includes full access to all of our My Playbook tools like the Waiver Assistant, Trade Analyzer, Start Sit Assistant, and Autopilot, along with our DFS tools, all of our Discord channels. Again, check out this great deal for 6 free months of full access to our tools and Discord over at fantasypros.com/offers. Let's get to game 3. Packers 28, Bears 19. Christian Watson, it is impossible to keep him out of the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, he has 8 touchdowns in the last 4 games. It's like, I think he has as many passing touchdowns as Russell Wilson does total this year. It's bad. It's absolutely ludicrous what he's doing. I know we got a site regression and all these numbers and things like that, but at the end of the day, all this signifies is the kid is a star. Like, he's a star in the making. Like, you don't find the end zone this many times by accident. And no, is the numbers going to keep up? No. But it just tells you that he's good, and you want pieces of him, and you want next year on your fantasy team. Like, these are all things that you want to be pointing for Watson, especially as he continues to see more targets in the offense. He had 6 targets this week, and he still scored 2 touchdowns. Like, the fact that he's doing on so little volume, if his volume ever changes, which I think eventually it will because of how talented he is and how raw he was coming out as a prospect, I mean, the ceiling is through the roof with Christian Watson. I think can be a future fantasy wide receiver 1 by maybe next year. So we're already seeing it kind of play out this year. So yes, you want to be in on Christian Watson. Shout out to Debro for really getting us all hooked on him during the draft season.
And 3 of the 4 games in which he scored a touchdown, he's scored multiple, which is how you get to 8 in 4 games. But when he has a good day, he has a great day. I didn't actually read the stat line, so just to share it, 3 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown on 6 targets, and then 1 rush for 46 yards and another touchdown. A.J. Dillon looked really good in this one. 18 carries, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Also 3 catches for 26 yards. And this is something we have not seen nearly often enough. Just to give the other side of that backfield, Aaron Jones, 9 for 26, also 5 catches for 24 yards. He was dealing with that shin issue, though.
Yeah, I mean, A.J. Dillon seems like he only plays well against the Bears, because I think his best game earlier this year was also against the Bears. So, look, the A.J. Dillon, I guess they're more happy to kind of get him more involved, that we had a lull where they really weren't using him that much. But, I mean, this shin injury has been something Jones has been dealing with, all year, just, remembering the injury reports. He's been on the injury report with a shin injury before, and he's kind of more of a fragile running back. So, it makes sense that maybe he's starting to break down a little bit as the season progresses. They're leaning more on A.J. Dillon. So, if you've kept A.J. Dillon, throughout the season, which I know a lot of people haven't because of how bad he was playing, then you are happy here that the usage is trending more into his direction, not just this week, but also last week as well.
Allen Lazard, 5 catches, 6 targets, 67 yards. Then for the Bears, Justin Fields was back and looked like the Justin Fields we've seen recently. Didn't throw for a touchdown. He did throw 2 picks, but 20 of 25, 254 yards, and then 71 yards on the ground, and that awesome rushing touchdown. Equanimeous St. Brown, 3 for 85 on 4 targets. N'Keal Harry had a big catch. Cole Kmet, team high 7 targets, 72 yards. Chase Claypool, 5 for 28 on 6. Not a lot of big stat lines here, you notice. And then David Montgomery, 14 for 61 and a touchdown. Also had 4 catches on 5 targets for a whopping 6 yards. I heard you laugh during N'Keal Harry. As a Patriots fan, what was it like watching him make that catch?
He made that catch look so much more difficult than it needed to be. He's I feel like he's pirouetting in the air to grab it with one of his hands. I'm like, hey man, credit to him, making plays for a new team. I obviously nothing against him, just the fact it didn't work out, and I'm disappointed because I knew he had some talent. So I'm glad he's making plays. But yeah, Justin Fields, you want him to get pressured because he gets scrambles. I do think it's interesting that he only rushed 6 times in this game. I don't know how many design rushes he had. It was because we've seen games where he's had 18 carries. That, I didn't think that was going to be the case this week, but when he's scrambling, that's him just going into Justin Fields mode and just turning magic, 55-yard touchdown on a scramble. So that's going to continue to happen. Maybe we don't see as many design rushes because of his shoulder injury, but he's still going to scramble when he's under pressure, and then he's going to create magic.
Both of these teams are among the 6 on bye next week. Let's move to Lions 40, Jaguars 14. Not the performance from Jacksonville that we expected after their great comeback against the Ravens last week and just how good Trevor Lawrence had looked lately. Again, we talked about that injury scare at the top of the show. We also talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown already. Again, 11 catches on 12 targets, 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jamal Williams got his weekly rushing touchdown, though he only had 35 yards on 11 touches. DeAndre Swift, 14 for 62 and a touchdown. Also 4 catches for 49 yards. Starting to look a little more like the DeAndre Swift we expected, right?
Yes, and I was happy because Jamal Williams hit the under on his fantasy of 11 points because I knew he would score, but I knew he would come under the rushing yards, so we hit it on the under with Jamal Williams. Happy to see that, even though it totally played out in a way that I did not foresee whatsoever. I thought the Lions would lose, and it was weird because you mentioned DeAndre Swift. The Lions win 40-14, and you think, oh, Jamal Williams must have 8 in the second half. Not the case whatsoever. They use more of DeAndre Swift. Swift had more carries, 14-11. He had more targets. He had 6 targets, 4 catches for 49 yards. Also scored a rushing touchdown. 54% opportunity share. Out-touched Williams 18-11. We're seeing Swift in a positive trend right now, and as the Lions continue to rack up wins, this team's not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, and they want to finish the season strong. They've won 4 out of the last 5 games, and I think they're starting to realize, yes, let's get Swift more involved. I remember reading reports saying that this was Swift's best week of practice, and I think that you're starting to see that show with how they're using him more than Jamal Williams. This was a massive win for them, and for them not to lean on Jamal Williams in the second half, they would almost always do, a month ago, they would always see Jamal Williams in this situation. For them to use more of DeAndre Swift is super encouraging for people that have held on to Swift for this long.
Yeah, if the Lions get St. Brown and Swift and DJ Chark, who had 98 yards today, if they can all get pretty healthy at the same time, I know they all played today, but obviously guys still sort of coming back from injuries. But if they're all healthy at the same time, this is going to remain a very fun team to watch, very fun team to bet the over on, and probably a fun team for fantasy managers On the other side, Christian Kirk, 6 catches, 104 yards on 8 targets. Evan Ingram did have a touchdown, just 30 yards. Travis Etienne, 13 carries, 54 yards. He also had 12 yards through the air, so not a big performance coming off of the week where they said he was going to play, and he did, but, was coming off that foot injury the week prior. And then Trevor Lawrence, again, he had that injury scare, but did come back, 17 for 31, 179 yards, and a touchdown, also 32 yards on the ground. Any concerns here that in what should have been a really great matchup when they were trailing? So they should have been throwing a lot against such a bad defense that these guys didn't really step up and have these big fantasy days we were hoping for?
I think so. I mean, this is a spot you expect them to deliver in, and they really didn't. They really came up short. Now, the injury thing does kind of throw in another layer of variance to it. He looked okay, but it's like, was he okay? Like mentally, like where was he there? Was he worried about like, oh, I don't want to hurt my leg? Like what's going on? Like, and also you just get freaked out by those types of injuries. Oh my God, like Trevor Lawrence, like he's such a big investment by the Jaguars. Like, let's make sure he's okay. Like, even if he feels okay, like we want to make sure that he's 100%. So, disappointing. I mean, Zay Jones, like, God, like the classic massive game last week and just an absolute, he had tons of drops. He had 7 targets, 2 catches, a lot of drops for Zay Jones. It's just kind of like, that's what you get when you guys like Zay Jones, like Jags, like on the team and just in real football terms, like he's a Jag, and that's why he's not someone you always want to rely on from week to week because he can put in these types of games. So ETN, I think, is just, the Lions' defense has been a lot better against the running back. So I was lower on ETN this week. I had him outside my top 15 running backs, and I looked at kind of weird for some people. But I was like, no, Lions are not the same run defense they've been. They've been really good the last month or so. And just look at the box scores of all the running backs they've faced. And they've shut down running games. And today they also shut down the pass. So credit to them.
Jaguars are at the Titans next week. Lions are going to host the Vikings. That could be a really fun game to watch. Next game up, Browns 27, Texans 14. Not many standout stat lines here. So sort of my first question is just, what did we think of how the Browns offense looked with Deshaun Watson at quarterback?
It looked like a guy that hadn't played real football in 700 days was playing quarterback, Ryan, to be totally honest with you. It did not look good. He looked not comfortable in the pocket whatsoever. He was scrambling around. He had 7 rushes today. He completed 12 passes on 22 attempts, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick, 131 yards. The offense looked better with Jacoby Brissett. I'm not going to lie. Like, just point blank. And the only reason they won this game is because of special teams and defense, scoring 2 touchdowns for the Browns here. So if they'd been playing any other team except the Houston Texans... I was going to say,
they actually won for 3 reasons. Special teams, defense, and their opponent.
Yes, that is exactly it. If they had not played the Houston Texans, I'm pretty sure they would have lost to the other 30 NFL teams today with Deshaun Watson's performance because it was pretty bad. So...
we think that's just fully rust, right? Or do you think there's a long-term concern there?
I think it's definitely rust. I've seen Deshaun Watson play at a very high level of football, and obviously today's not that, but it's a matter of, okay, how long does it take him to knock off the rust? Like, the Browns are still kind of like in the playoff hunt, not really. They're 5-8, so I'm not really expecting them to make much noise, but they did win the game against the Texans, so... I still think it's concerning. It hurts guys like Cooper and Peoples-Jones, where it's like you were confident in them more or less with Jacoby Brissett because you knew what you're going to get, and now it's just we don't know what we're going to get. And Amari Cooper now again was on the road again, and maybe that's why he sucked because he just always sucks on the road. So when they go back at home, maybe that's a better environment for them. Are they home next week, the Browns?
They're at the Bengals.
Yeah, so that could be another rough outing, honestly, for Deshaun Watson.
Nick Chubb had 17 for 80 on the ground. I don't know why they didn't run him 35 times, especially with Watson looking rusty and facing a horrendous run defense. Kareem Hunt, 9 for 56, also had 2 catches. DPJ had the punt return for a touchdown. Dameon Pierce got going a little bit again. He had 95 combined yards on 21 touches. And then Nico Collins, who you've been talking about for a few weeks, team high 10 targets, only 35 yards, but did get a touchdown.
Yeah, you get 3 catches because of the inaccurate. It's just like, it's one of those 3 catches on 10 targets. So, yeah, he's the alpha in the offense. Even if Brandon Cooks is healthy or not, it doesn't really matter. But you can only go so far when Kyle Allen is your quarterback. Like, it's going to be very inefficient stat lines. And unfortunately, it's going to take him 10 horrible targets to get you any type of fantasy production. So don't go crazy on Nico Collins if he's on waivers, if he's out there. Just, practice discipline, please.
Game number 6, Vikings 27, Jets 22. Garrett Wilson, again, a guy that you've been talking about for months, obviously. 8 for 162, 15 targets. They threw the ball, I think, 57 times, the Jets did in this one.
Yeah, I mean, they were in comeback mode. Mike was just chucking the ball across the place. Now, he didn't really throw. He wasn't really great efficiency. He did throw some interceptions. Not all his fault, though. Some of them were off-tip passes. So for those that are victory lapping, oh, Mike White sucks. It's like, okay, like it wasn't all of his fault. It was not like that Cincinnati game last year where he threw 4 interceptions. I don't think it was like that whatsoever. But, I mean, Garrett Wilson just straight up alpha. And I was warning people about Elijah Moore, too. I was like, guys, like he was playing behind Corey Davis last week. And he did that again this week, and that's why he had 2 catches for 7 yards.
Are you interested in Corey Davis? 5 for 85 on 10 targets.
He's the guy that is he's the wide receiver too. Like he's the other guy in the offense. Now it's important to keep in mind because of how often they threw the ball, like 57 times, that the target numbers are inflated. So Corey Davis 10 targets is not the same 10 targets that we get from someone throwing the ball like 35 times. So that's why I wouldn't get too carried away, but as the Jets continue to have good matchups, it's again another high-powered scoring game against the Buffalo Bills coming up, then yeah, I think Corey Davis is interesting. I'd rather have Corey Davis than as a starting player than Elijah Moore because Corey Davis plays more. So I think it's important to keep in mind. That's why we look at routes run and snap shares because it helps us figure out, okay, which guy's going to play the most.
Did you like what you saw from Zonovan Knight, 15 for 90 rushing and then 5 catches on 5 targets for 28 yards?
Yeah, I was definitely not, I was skeptical about Knight and how he would be deployed with James Robinson, but, another week in here and he just totally dominated the touches. And it wasn't just as a rusher. He also dominated a lot of the receiving work. Now he did mix in with Ty Johnson a little bit, but the fact that he's just involved as a receiver at all, like that's all you really care about. Like they like Ty Johnson in a 3rd down role, but the fact that Zonovan Knight was still involved as a receiver in a game that they were losing, I think is encouraging. That means he's not going to get game scripted out. So you can probably play him as like a top 24 running back, especially next week when there are a bunch of teams on bye week. So Zonovan Knight's going to be someone you're probably going to start next week.
Justin Jefferson going up against a difficult secondary, only had 45 yards on a team-high 10 targets, 7 catches, but he did get in the end zone to sort of save the fantasy day. Dalvin Cook, 20 for 86 and a touchdown. Alexander Mattison also had a touchdown. TJ Hawkinson, just 33 yards on 6 targets. Adam Thielen, just 27 yards on 6 targets. Also, again, very tough secondary that the Vikings were going up against. Vikings are at the Lions, so they will not have a tough secondary next week, and the Jets are at the Bills, who they beat earlier this year, so that should be another really fun one. Next game up, we had a tie. Commanders 20, Giants 20. Ties are hilarious and lame and everything in between. Terry McLaurin, 8 catches, 105 yards, team high 12 targets. We say it every week. He is just getting peppered by targets as long as Taylor Heineke is the quarterback.
Yep, he's getting peppered by targets, and that's why he's really the only reliable guy you should trust in this Washington passing game. And I get they're on bye week, or they're coming up on a bye, but do not necessarily use them with guys like Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, those types of players. That's where you're seeing the inflated target numbers come from how often the Washington Commanders had to throw in this particular game. So Samuel had 7 targets, Dotson had 9 targets. I would not be go chasing those guys off the waiver wire because it was a week where the Commanders had to throw the ball a lot more than they usually do. So I think they're really going to regress back to what they have been doing, and it really is only Terry McLaurin that you can trust among these receivers.
We just got word from Mayor that we did a poll in the chat to see who's tougher, Amon-Ra St. Brown or Andrew Erickson. And by a 2-1 margin, Amon-Ra St. Brown won.
I'll take it.
7% of the vote. I can't believe you got over 30%. I can't believe you got over 3% of the vote, let alone over 30%. But you have some fans in the chat. Sticking with the Commanders, Brian Robinson, 21 for 96 rushing. Antonio Gibson, who was banged up during the week, just 9 for 39, but definitely a Robinson day. Didn't get in the end zone, but still, the usage we like to see, good yardage there. And then on the Giants side, Saquon Barkley, 18 for 63 and a touchdown. He had 100% of running back carries. The only other person on the Giants to have a rush attempt was Daniel Jones, who went 25 of 31, 200 yards, 1 touchdown, 71 on the ground. And Darius Slayton, 6 for 90, team high 8 targets. Is he still undervalued as a fantasy wide receiver?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, if he's on your waivers, like he's just been very, very steady, like a top 30 receiver. And I think I talked about him on the preview show. He's been a top 45 wide receiver basically in every week since week 5. So he's someone that should be on all rosters and someone that you're probably starting as a wide receiver 3 most weeks. And I think especially going into next week where we talked about, there are so many teams on buys. Like Darius Slayton, you're going to start him. I know it's going to be a tough matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, but he's still been pretty consistent as the only guy really that's getting production in this Giants passing game. Now, it is important to mention, too, that Bellinger came back here in this game, the rookie tight end. Look, tight end's horrible, but he came in and immediately had production. He went 5 for 5, I believe, catching all of his targets for 24 yards. Not great, but hey, in PPR, that's 10 points. So, take it.
The Commanders are one of those teams on bye next week. The Giants are going to host the Eagles. Speaking of the Eagles, last game in our early afternoon slate, 35-10 victory over the Titans. We already talked about Jalen Hurts in our fantasy takeaway section in the notes. I put that there were too many options. We already talked about Hurts.
Too many.
A.J. Brown went 8 for 119 and 2 touchdowns, team high 10 targets in his revenge game against the Titans that he admitted after the game. And I think everybody could have predicted that he had circled this one on the calendar and was treating it like a revenge game.
Truly a man of the people.
Yeah, seriously. We've had so many dud revenge games. We talked about it on the Friday show this year. It was nice to see him actually step up and have a huge game, not just a good one. But then DeVonta Smith, I also wanted to mention in this, fantasy takeaway section because he's been getting more usage lately. 8 targets today, 102 yards and a touchdown, making fantasy owner or managers happy with lines like that.
Look, I mean, it's been the same thing without Dallas Goedert. We want these concentrated passing games, and it's always been concentrated. Like the last couple of weeks has been DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown have combined for 60, 70% of the team's total targets. And actually, this week was the week they combined for the least amount in terms of just comparing it to weeks prior, still over 50% of the team's targets. And you obviously then had the scores against this pass funnel Titans defense. Again, I mentioned Miles Sanders. He rushed for 24 yards today. He did absolutely nothing except eventually score the rushing touchdown towards the end of the game. So this was a pass-heavy attack, and you're going to see this next week too until Dallas Goedert comes back, which I believe is week 15. It's going to be Smith, it's going to be A.J. Brown that are getting all the usage in this offense.
I believe Jordan Davis was back in this game for the Eagles, right? Because he
Correct.
is obviously a big difference maker at run defense for them. And Derrick Henry only had 11 carries for 30 yards. He also had 8 yards through the air on 3 targets. Are you concerned at all, or just a tough matchup that the game got away from them early too?
I mean, this is what happens with Derrick Henry. If he doesn't end up wearing it down a defense, then they take him out. He doesn't break off those big runs, and he's not productive. This is why I didn't like Derrick Henry drafting him. And I've been wrong some weeks, I've been right some weeks, because it just depends on what week it is. If you get the Derrick Henry game flow that you need, then he destroys you. But if you get the game where they fall behind and they can't establish the run, then Derrick Henry does games like this. I will say, though, that it's Julius Chestnut. He was the RB2 in this game. He had 5 carries. It all came in garbage time. So Derrick Henry was still operating. It's getting all the touches until the end of the game when they put Chestnut in, just because the game was out of reach. So don't pay attention to that without Hassan Haskins active in this game. But look, yeah, just Derrick Henry's variance from week to week. I know he has good matchups still coming up. I mean, he's playing the Jaguars next week, so it's just well, he's probably gonna bounce back. This is a good spot for him to likely bounce back.
Chig Okonkwo, tight end for the Titans. Tight end for the Titans is actually not easy to say. 4 catches on 5 targets, 68 yards. And Treylon Burks, who we actually skipped over on accident through the injury section because there were so many injuries to get through. He just had 1 catch for 25 yards. It was that touchdown catch. He did suffer a concussion. Obviously, we don't really love the Titans passing game anyway. If he were to miss next week's game because of the concussion protocol, would you turn to anybody else like Westbrook-Ikhine or Robert Woods, or would you just avoid it entirely?
I mean, Robert Woods has been one of the most inefficient receivers. Every week I look at, he's got 6, 7 targets, 1 catch, 2 catches. So he's getting the volume already, and it's not turning into production. So for me, it would be Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, especially because he plays the slot. And we just saw Jacksonville get absolutely destroyed by Amon-Ra St. Brown, who plays the slot. They've been horrible against slot receivers. So I think Nick Westbrook-Ikhine would probably be the guy to grab totes for it. But I honestly, Chig Okonkwo, I am super intrigued by, because every game this guy plays in, he's ripping off some big 20-yard catch and run. Every single he's entering this game, he led all tight ends in yards per reception at 18.8. And he did it again this week. He had another big catch and run. So the fact that he has more targets than Austin Hooper over the last 2 weeks, he's sneaky, especially against Jacksonville. So if you need a tight end, snap speed, I don't care. I'm following this rookie tight end. That's
he's doing exactly what he did when he was at Maryland, which is barely get any usage, but then reel off big plays right and left when he does get the usage. He's obviously a super athlete and very explosive player. Eagles are at the Giants next week. Titans host the Jaguars. We mentioned both of those already. Let's move to the late afternoon slate. 4 games left. Seahawks 27, Rams 23. Cam Akers, is he back? He had 17 carries, 60 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. I saw somebody on Twitter posted that he had a 73% snap share today. It's the first time he's been over 50% all season long.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Sean McVay had been turning Kyron Williams into his favorite running back, and then today he decided, no, I'm going to make Cam Akers my favorite running back. Wish he told us. Like, that would have been nice to know if he's going to give the ball to Cam Akers. But I'm happy for Akers here. I liked Akers coming into the season. Obviously has not worked out the way that I thought it would. I know that this is great for my best ball teams. I have Cam Akers on them. So all those dead teams. So I'm really happy about that. But yeah, I mean, he's going to be the guy I'm going to rank highest moving forward. Still not seeing the receiving usage, which is a big concern for him. I know he did see some targets in this game. He did have a nice catch on near the sideline, the one-hander. But Kyron Williams is still probably going to see more involvement as a receiver in most cases. That's how it's been the last 2 weeks. But it's impossible to ignore a 73% snap share. That's really good for running back. And Akers has looked much better. And even when he's been splitting touches with Kyron Williams, Akers has looked good. Like, he has not looked sluggish like he did at the beginning of the year. And that's probably due to more time away from the Achilles injury, taking some time off while he was in the doghouse or whatever. Like, he wasn't practicing. So maybe that worked out well for him. And they still hate Darrell Henderson. So they like Cam Akers again.
Would you drop Kyron Williams or just hold on because you never know what this backfield is going to look like week to week?
At this point, I think if anything, we don't know what this backfield is going to be like week to week, so I don't trust it. So you're never going to feel confident about starting Kyron Williams because you're going to have to see him become the starter again, and then you might start him. But we've already seen a scenario where they went back to Akers when Kyron Williams didn't do anything wrong. So it's like, what's the point? So yeah, I'm fine dropping Kyron Williams.
On the Seattle side, Tyler Lockett, 9 for 128 and a touchdown, team high 12 targets. DK Metcalf also feasted 8 for 127 and a touchdown himself on 8 targets. Noah Fant got in on the scoring action, just 42 yards, but also got in the end zone. He had 5 targets. Geno Smith, those 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 367 yards, 28 for 39. Any takeaways from this performance by the Seahawks? Or obviously it was a good day for them, but fairly expected, right?
Yeah, pretty status quo. I mean, the Rams are just a team that you want to attack now. Aaron Donald's hurt. Like, they just don't have anybody. And even with Ramsey, it's like Ramsey's been overrated this year anyway. Like, they've been just getting gashed by wide receivers. And Metcalf was making plays on Ramsey. They couldn't cover Lockett. And that's who the ball's going to. Like, every single week, Lockett and Metcalf are basically top 15 guys, especially in good matchups. And Geno's just dropping back and distributing the ball. So, especially if Ken Walker's out, they're just going to throw the ball more, I would think. So, yeah.
Seahawks host the Panthers next week. Rams host the Raiders. That's on Thursday Night Football. I cannot believe we have to watch this Rams team on Thursday Night Football. That's going to be a fun one. We thought a fun one was going to be 49ers and Dolphins. Instead, San Francisco ran away with it, 33-17 victory. Tyreek Hill, even in the loss, obviously a huge day. Team high 14 targets, 9 catches, 146 yards, and 1 touchdown. On the running game, which is really where I want to focus and ask you, Raheem Mostert, 7 for 30. Jeff Wilson, just 1 carry for 3 yards. It's not too surprising that they had a poor running game because they were, trailing for a large part of this game. But are you surprised at how that was split up with Mostert getting 7 of the 8 carries that the team had?
Yeah, no, definitely surprised at that. I guess it's one of those things where you couldn't expect the coaching staff to make Jeff Wilson, hey, because it was a revenge game for both of them. So you couldn't say, oh, well, we want to get Jeff the ball here. It's like, well, we want to get the ball to Raheem here too, because he also was on the 49ers. So I guess, the game got out of hand for them. Maybe it's a preference of they do prefer Mostert in, the hurry up and, trailing situation. I'd have to look at, the routes run exactly to kind of get an idea. That's probably the explanation behind it. I would expect that when the Dolphins are playing a team that they can play with the lead against, I think I'd probably see more of Jeff Wilson, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me for them to be like, yeah, Jeff Wilson, who's been really good for them, we're just going to go right back to Raheem Mostert, even though it had been Jeff Wilson's job as the RB1 for several weeks, even before Mostert got banged up. So yeah, definitely a little bit shocking, but I wouldn't read too much into it.
We already talked about Christian McCaffrey. Deebo Samuel had 6 for 58 on 10 targets. Brandon Ayuk, 5 for 46 on 9 targets. Not a ton of action for those guys, at least with the targets they got. Again, we'll see what Brock Purdy likes going forward and sort of which receivers he tends to target. I tend to agree with you that there's going to be a lot of dump offs to CMC in our future. And then Jordan Mason, 8 for 51 rushing. looked like the definitive backup right now to CMC. I think definitely a guy worth stashing if you have the room on your roster in case CMC goes down. Maybe you'll have a couple games here and there where he gets some usage for you as well. Do you agree with that?
Yep, yeah, 100%. So you can drop Tyrion Davis-Price, if you pick them up as a speculative ad. They didn't even I think that was a tell that they also didn't activate Tevin Coleman off the practice squad for this game, which some people were like, oh, Tevin Coleman, which I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if he had been activated, if he had been involved. But yeah, it's clearly Jordan Mason.
Dolphins are at the Chargers on Sunday Night Football next week. 49ers are going to host the Bucks. Bengals 27, Chiefs 24. Man, Cincinnati just has Kansas City's number. I don't know what it is. That's 3 straight wins for the Bengals over the Chiefs, obviously including the AFC Championship game last year. Samaje Perine filling in for Joe Mixon. I think a lot of people expected him to do better this week than he did last week because last week filling in for Mixon was going up against that tough Titans run defense. This week going up against the Chiefs, not as stout a run defense. He had 21 for 106, also 6 catches on 7 targets for 49 yards. Obviously still I don't know if you'd put a must start just because he's probably not in that top 5 level, but a clear start in games that Mixon isn't playing.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, last week he got all the touches except 1. This week he got all the touches except 2. And, one of them happened to be a Chris Evans touchdown. So he could have had an even bigger game here if he had found the end zone, but still he was super productive. And I really don't think the receiving role is that may not go away. He's always been kind of the guy they liked as a receiver more than Joe Mixon. And it's funny, actually, Jim Nantz was talking about on the broadcast about how he's when he was comparing Samaje Perine to Joe Mixon, he's like, oh, yeah, they're both the same. And I was like, oh, my God, don't tell Joe Mixon's agent that. Don't tell the Bengals that they're the same guy. It's but hey, they've both been productive in this offense, as you see when you play running backs with 3-down skill sets. And it's just weird because Perine used to be, or Mixon was Perine's backup at Oklahoma, and now it's the reversed, and they have different roles. But yeah, I mean, Perine, as long as Mixon is out, which this is why you don't drop handcuffs ever, because we all thought, oh, Mixon, it's just 1 week for a concussion. It's well, he's out a second week. So that's why you always want to hold on to these guys when you've seen, especially when you see them hit. It's one thing to hold a handcuff where you're hoping that he'll be the 3-down guy, but when you already know it, you have the bird in hand that is Samaje Perine, you don't drop him. I remember adding Samaje Perine, I'll just add him just so that no one else can use him, and then having to use him this week because I needed a running back and kind of stumbling into his production. So just something to keep in mind, especially as we get to the playoffs. You want to roster these handcuff running backs as opposed to this 5th wide receiver that you're literally never going to start.
Well, and you're right that you want to pick the right type of handcuff. It's why we always point to Tony Pollard or Alexander Madison as prime examples, because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if those lead backs go down, it's going to be Pollard, it's going to be Madison. Perine is now in that conversation. They are going to be the workhorse guy filling in. So that's just so much more valuable than a handcuff where it's you don't know what exactly.
Yeah, you literally don't know what's going to happen.
It's all conjecture. That's just not as valuable. Jamar Chase in his return, 7 catches, 97 yards, team high 8 targets. He had an incredible catch down the sideline that didn't count, but just seeing that catch, you're okay, he's healthy, he's back, he's ready to dominate here in the fantasy playoffs. T. Higgins, only 35 yards, only 5 targets, but he did have a really nice touchdown, so he sort of salvaged the fantasy day there. Tyler Boyd did better this week, not outstanding, but better this week than he did when Jamar Chase was out. I don't know why that is. He had 4 catches on 5 targets for 60 yards. Sort of all what we would expect from the Bengals passing game going forward, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think, Chase is the number 1 again. T. Higgins is going to have, spiked weeks as a wide receiver 2. He still has touchdown equity. He made a really nice catch. It was actually him that caught the game winning, to clinch the game, to get a first down for the Bengals. So, I mean, Burrow clearly trusts T. Higgins just as much as he trusts Jamar Chase. Just Chase is just better. It's just point blank. But Higgins at the beginning of the year, have massive games because if they're rolling coverage towards Chase, Higgins is going to ball out. So you start both those guys no matter what. And then Boyd, yeah, I mean, he's still someone you're not excited about starting, but with bye weeks coming up, you could do worse than starting a receiver that's attached to Joe Burrow, especially with Hayden Hurst out, as I pointed out at the beginning of the show. I think that's really why we saw Boyd's production boost up a little bit, because he's really competing with targets with Hayden Hurst and the running backs versus Chase and Higgins, who really are more downfield threats.
Isaiah Pacheco, 14 for 66 and a rushing touchdown. I have a feeling we will see that exact stat line from him a few times this year.
Dude, he looks so good. He looks so much better than Edwards-Helaire. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. It's not even close. I wonder what Edwards-Hilaire's usage is it's obviously going to be lower, but when he comes back off IR, I'm really curious to see, is it like gone entirely or just a lot
going to be
lower?
What did Ronald Jones do today? It's going to be that.
Yeah.
Whatever Ronald Jones did.
Pacheco also had two targets and 2 catches for 16 yards. Travis Kelce, 4 catches, 6 targets, 56 yards. And Juju Smith-Schuster, just 3 for 35 on 4 targets. MVS had 2 for 71 on 6 targets. I mean, there's no real like standout lines here. Obviously, it just wasn't a very good day from Patrick Mahomes, especially compared to what we usually see from him. I don't think it's really worth dwelling on because we certainly don't expect that to be, the case going forward. Next week's Chiefs are at Broncos. Bengals host the Browns. Let's get to our last game. Raiders, Chargers. Raiders won 27-20. No, I will not be skipping the Raiders section this week. We will start with the Raiders section in this one. Devontae Adams, 8 for 177 and 2 touchdowns on a team high 12 targets. Josh Jacobs, 26 for 144 and 1 rushing touchdown. And if not for those 2, I may very well have skipped the Raiders section because nobody else did anything. It was the 2 stars, and that's it.
I mean, that's what it is. You get combined 60 fantasy points from those 2 guys every week. You just don't know how it's distributed. Just like they're going to score 60, maybe it'll be 40-20, maybe 30-30, maybe 50-10. Like it's just like that's how it is every single week with these 2. And like I really had no doubt in my mind that this like Josh Jacobs calf thing was just like whatever. Like he's going to let it come out. He's playing the charge. He's going to ball out, and it's exactly what he did. And then Devontae, I'm sad because I was so high on AJ Brown. I think I ranked him ahead of Devontae, and I was like taking victory laps in the chat. I'm like, yeah, like AJ Brown's like, and then Devontae just like smacks in my face because he just does that much better than AJ Brown did. So you can't win them all, Ryan.
Yeah, no, you cannot, especially not in fantasy. Looking at the receivers for the Chargers. Josh Palmer, 7 for 60 on 11 targets. Keenan Allen, we were talking about Nico Collins having, 3 catches on 10 targets. Keenan Allen had 6 catches on 14 targets, which of course led the team for the Chargers. He did have 88 yards and a touchdown on those 6 catches. Nice to see him healthy and actually playing football since we haven't gotten to see that for so many weeks this season. Justin Herbert threw the ball 47 times, just completed 28 passes, 335 yards and a touchdown. And then Austin Eckler, fairly typical Eckler day, no touchdowns, but 10 for 35 on the ground and then 5 for 67 through the air. So I believe, if I'm doing that math correctly, that did just barely get him over 100 combined yards for the day. Any takeaways from the Chargers side of this?
No, I mean, they just throw the ball so much that he's going to be able to support. I know Gerald Everett, I think, had a decent game here as well, too. They just throw so much. I know DeAndre Carter didn't do anything really today, but, most weeks you're going to start Josh Palmer as like a flex. As long as Mike Williams is out, we'll see what happens when he comes back, but he's probably going to be something you're going to want to start because the volume is there for not just one guy to get double-digit targets. Like, multiple guys are going to get double targets every single week. And Keenan Allen, I will say, like, he had a really nice catch on his touchdown. Like, it was a 4th down catch, caught it in the end zone.
Yeah, he did. It was a great throw, too.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Herbert makes, like, on some unbelievable throws. I just wish he had just, like, supporting cast with the line and issues. I wish it was better, but alas, you can't have everything you want, Ryan. Not even for Christmas.
No, you can't. Chargers host the Dolphins on Sunday Night Football next week. Raiders are also in primetime. Like I said, they're going to be at Los Angeles to face the Rams on Thursday Night Football. Lots of injuries to get through today. Lots of games to get through with only the 2 teams on bye. We got through it all in under an hour. Thank you for rushing through it with us, everyone. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you for tuning in, and please remember to check out the opportunities we mentioned with our jersey giveaways and, of course, our awesome deposit offer. Also, don't forget to check out this very show live every Sunday night of the entire fantasy season, again, around 7:45 Eastern each and every week. Most of all, thank you, the fans, for listening. For Erickson and Deepak, I'm Ryan Wormley. We will see you again next week.